Shall we start? I feel very honored to be here with all of you, such an august audience, and I beg for your good wishes, your blessings, that we can say something that may stimulate your thinking on the subject. History will give evidence. Writing our history to prepare ISKCON's future. In the last session, Anuttama Prabhu spoke to us about challenges, and I think challenges to being on the world stage. And I think there's something of a blend into this presentation. When I looked at the application form for giving an ILS presentation, there were several. You could choose: is your ILS presentation focused on this or another theme? There were so many themes. One was communication. So I finally settled on communication, but I was thinking this actually applies to all of the different, congregational preaching, outreach, devotee care, all of the different categories. The title comes, History Will Give Evidence. This comes from a quote from Srila Prabhupada. Whoops. Yes. Prabhupada said in a letter to Jayashree in 1969, our movement is the greatest gift to the human race. They may not immediately appreciate it, but time will come and history will give evidence that this movement saved the human society from being fallen into barbarianism. Srila Prabhupada's word, barbarianism. So Srila Prabhupada he's making a big claim here. He's claiming that this will be the Krishna consciousness will be the greatest gift to the human race. And he also says this movement saved the human society from being fallen into barbarianism. So he's kind of making affirmations, you could say, about the future. And he's saying that history will play a role, namely to give evidence. So that's one way of understanding history. It's going to give evidence that this is the case. This is what's being accomplished. So the question I would raise is, who is recording this history? And how is it being archived? And how is it being communicated? History will give evidence. What will be the evidence? We think of a court case. What kind of evidence is being brought forward? Who is gathering the evidence? How is the evidence being archived? Who has access to the evidence? And how is the evidence being presented? These, I think, are questions that we want to reflect on. And what I'm going to do in this presentation is refer a couple of times to the same professor that Anuttama Prabhu did in his presentation, namely Tom Hopkins, who expressed a different kind of concern about ISKCON history. And I have to say, you may have appreciated from what Anuttama Prabhu was saying, that Thomas Hopkins was very much a well-wisher of our ISKCON society. You may find it interesting that he did his doctoral dissertation on the Srimad Bhagavatam at Yale University in 1962. This is before Srila Prabhupada came to America. Tom Hopkins said, ISKCON should study its own history. It needs to do so for its own health and self-understanding. So, Tom is giving two reasons to study our history. It's for our own health, and it's for self-understanding. So as we endeavor for our individual physical and mental health, so we may endeavor for our collective health. Self-understanding means understanding in relation to the world around us over time. That's maybe one way of understanding self-understanding. Hopkins then specifies ISKCON's history needs to be studied, quote, with constant reference to what it could be and should be on the basis of Prabhupada's fundamental principles. It's interesting, a professor is saying this. It is to be done in an evaluative manner to first recognize and build on strengths, and second, to recognize and correct mistakes before they cause future harm. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Yeah, this is the quote. This is also from Hopkins. Oops. Oh, thank you. So this is again Hopkins speaking. ISKCON's history over the past 3 decades must be studied with, and I added the numbers here, constant reference to what it could be and should be on the basis of Prabhupada's fundamental principles. And third, so that strengths can be recognized and built upon. And four, mistakes can be corrected before they cause future harm. This is a very different sort of understanding of how to approach history than Srila Prabhupada is saying in the quote from the letter that I mentioned before. So, valuing and evaluating history. I keep forgetting. Maybe you should do this. Thank you. Valuing and evaluating history. I would say, broadly speaking, there are 2 ways to think about history. One is a story or a narrative. And a story and a narrative is about change. It's about movement. We call ourselves the Hare Krishna movement. This understanding of history helps to see and appreciate change over time, which in turn enables both valuing and evaluation. Is this change good? We can ask ourselves. Is it in a desirable direction? Is this serving the purpose of Srila Prabhupada and previous acharyas? We like to tell the story of Srila Prabhupada's rise to glory from obscurity. What story or stories are we telling about the time from 1977 to the present? How are we telling that story or those stories? In turn, by highlighting movement and change, The recording and articulating of history enables self-orientation, locating ourselves individually and collectively, enabling what Hopkins called self-understanding. But again, what is self-understanding? A sense of who we are in relation to others, in relation to Vaishnava history, in relation to other traditions, in relation to changing cultural landscapes and ideascapes, in relation to changing technology, in relation to changing climate. Next slide. Another way to think of history is as an ongoing process of individual and collective reflection, as a component of what Srila Prabhupada called boiling the milk, enriching devotees' spiritual lives. If we think about boiling milk, this is a thickening process. It's enriching the substance. In our case, the missionary and the community building enterprise in service to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's like building, like boiling milk. It must be done carefully, with patience, so as not to burn the milk. We have within and surrounding our movement a variety of ways in which history is being recorded and is being broadcast. And these are only a few, but there are already several biographies, especially in English language, perhaps in other languages as well, and autobiographies, and some might want to say hagiographies or sacred biographies. There are well over 50 books about Srila Prabhupada. Some have counted closer to 100. ISKCON Communications Journal, some of you may be aware of, it has come back into existence after a break of several years. There are so many websites, official and we might want to say less official. There are podcasts, and I think this is a very interesting phenomenon. Some very popular podcasts are happening by different devotees. Hundreds, even thousands of people are watching. And there's academic writing. And I tend to be focused, interested in particular on the academic writing. And so what I want to do now is call your attention to some of the, we might say history writing, but it's also sociology, it's anthropology. Two of the earlier books are portrayed here. Hare Krishna and the Counterculture by Stilson Judah, who very much appreciated Srila Prabhupada. He would come and attend Srila Prabhupada's classes sometimes. Kind of a sociological study. Also, Hare Krishna transformed. His second book, Burke Rockford wrote another book. He focused mainly on the New Vrindavan community. Somewhat later, we have this collection of essays, the Hare Krishna movement. What was the subtitle? The post-charismatic fate of a religious transplant. This included articles which were, we might want to say, both favorable and not favorable. I have 2 articles, or an article and a half in this book, both very favorable. And then sometime later, the Hare Krishna movement, 40 years of chant and change. Also articles by a mixture of scholars, devotee scholars. You may not know about this book. The scholar who wrote this, John Fahey, spent 1 year here in Mayapur. He's an anthropologist. He was doing his doctoral dissertation for Cambridge University. And he spent a year here doing what they call participatory observation, which means you participate in what everyone is doing. You go to Mangal Arati, you go to the class, you attend the programs. And at the same time, he was interviewing devotees, mainly Western devotees. And one of his conclusions was that this book is about Mayapur specifically. One of his conclusions was Western devotees, in any case, here in Mayapur, to a large extent, they strike me as rather lonely. They're coming here for association, but they're telling me, he's one person is interviewing them, whether that's can be applied, but that was his observation. Branding bhakti, Krishna consciousness, and the makeover of a movement. Again, an anthropologist did this study. This is from 2021. She studied, or she interviewed, she examined three groups within ISKCON to characterize, to try to understand how the Krishna consciousness movement is being rebranded. And much more recently, we have bringing Krishna back to India, global and local networks in a Hare Krishna temple in Mumbai. This, of course, is about the Chowpatty temple. It's again somewhat, we would perhaps say a sociological study. This was written by a former student we had at Bhaktivedanta College. I haven't seen her in several years, so I don't know what her present mood is, but certainly she's written something which I think we should note is published by Oxford University Press, one of the most respected publishers in the English-speaking world. So this is the kind of book that scholars will read. And then two books by a devotee, her name is Arya Devi in Australia, that have come out very recently. Leading the Hare Krishna movement, the crisis of succession in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. This was published by Routledge, also a respected publisher. And this was her doctoral dissertation, and she interviewed all of the zonal acharyas who were still alive at the time that she could interview them. And that became her dissertation. Even more recently, she's published this small book, but very significant, Hare Krishna in the 21st Century. Significant is that this has been published by Cambridge University Press. So when you have a prestige publisher like this, it means people will take this book seriously. Moving back in time somewhat, we have some, we might want to say, less academic, more devotional writings. We have Mukunda Goswami's Inside the Hare Krishna Movement, an ancient Eastern religious tradition comes of age in the Western world. And this book next to it, I have to say, I'm not familiar with Bhakti Yoga and the Hare Krishna movement, a collection of essays. This was done by our godbrother Satyaraj Prabhu. Over the years, he's been writing on the Krishna consciousness movement. I think now is the time we can change the guard. I want to introduce to you Lokarama Prabhu, who is a resident of Mayapur, and he is actively engaged in what I like to call oral history. He is doing interviews of devotees, and I think this is going to be the kind of thrust of the message. What we want to leave you with is that oral history is a must, and it is being done by some devotees to some extent. We think it could be much increased. So, Lokaram Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, thank you all for allowing me to be here, even though it was basically Maharaj's mercy and invitation. I wanted to ask, how many of you, for example, know the history of how the deities in your local temple came to be there? Raise your hand if you know. Okay. How many of you have a written account or like a filmed account where you could point someone to if they wanted to learn more about the deities that are in the temple? A handful. Nice. So this is just one example of how history is relevant for us. We're serving specific deities in our temples and their personalities. We want to know, how did they come here? Sometimes they're very special stories. There are stories that are written like the one for Lord Nrsingadev here in Mayapur. Also Lord Jagannath, Baladev and Subhadra at Rajpur. But that's just a simple example. There's also many other types of historical projects that could be done, like biographies of spiritual heroes or personal memoirs for devotees who are getting older, who have experience and wisdom they'd like to pass on, they'd like to share. So we're just wanting to encourage devotees to take up their own projects. And the next several slides will be getting into practical tips on how to do that. We have handouts for everyone, if you'd like to take one, that have interviewing tips and also sample questions that you can use to get started in approaching devotees and collecting your own interviews. So, in terms of practical resources, there's been a huge technological breakthrough that has actually made this type of service a lot easier. AI transcription is extremely effective and accurate and affordable and fast. I don't know how many of you have experience with sitting down and listening to a lecture or an interview and trying to type out a transcription. But it's very tedious and it takes a long time. I'd say at least 3 times as long as the actual audio file, if you're quick. So like for an hour of audio, it usually takes about 3 hours to type out a good, clean transcript. Now, there are AI tools that can make a clean, accurate, relatively accurate, I'd say within 90 to 95% accuracy, even for Sanskrit words and shlokas. Within a matter of minutes, it can generate a very good, very accurate transcript within 5 minutes or less. Yeah. And then there's other tools that are really helpful, like AI summaries. So if you take a transcript and you put that into an AI platform and you ask for a summary, it'll generate a very accurate, very high quality bullet point summary of the basic content of that interview. So it saves a lot of time, and it makes it really easy to just keep your interviews organized and be able to quickly reference, okay, this interview I can go to for these points and so forth. So there's a lot of really valuable tools that we can leverage. One devotee was joking with me recently that he's a little bit of a Luddite. That means in America there's a certain type of person who, it's a certain cultural group that doesn't like technology. It was Ashram Maharaj. He's up front. I didn't want to point you out, but and there's a place for that. In fact, sannyasis, I think it's good, but there's also a place for leveraging technology, and certainly Srila Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur set the example that we can take full advantage of any technology that can help us in our service to Krishna. So I really wanted to put that out there to take full advantage of in terms of historical research projects, that AI tools are really a groundbreaking resource. Next is basic guidelines. Like I said, we have a handout, so don't worry about taking exhaustive notes on these next full few slides, because it's all covered in the handout, but we'll just go over it together. So the basic way to approach an interview is you want to ask open-ended questions, and you want to let the interviewee guide the conversation. The reason is because memory is often associative. It's hard to just call to mind something instantaneously, especially if it happened 10, 20, 30 years ago. But the more you start talking about it, the more it comes back to your mind, and you remember, oh yeah, and this happened, and this person was there, and then this happened. So you want to interrupt as infrequently as possible, and just encourage storytelling, and also, rather than talking about what happened, try to ask gentle prompts to encourage devotees to share stories, specific instances, specific examples that illustrate the principles. Like if they say, boy, that was a terrible year, or that was a terrible decade, you can ask, why? Could you tell me more about that? Or could you share a couple episodes that illustrate why that was so terrible for you, for example? To start with, it's good to get demographic information like their name, their date, the date and place of birth, education and cultural background, etc. And then just ask how they joined the movement, and ask them to share a little bit about themselves. And then after that, if you're interviewing a devotee who's not, like if they didn't join the movement, but if they were born in the movement, then you could ask, can you tell me how you grew up as a Hare Krishna, what that was like for you? And again, interrupt only if necessary, and you can ask for clarifications later on. So if you do think of something that you want to ask later, you can just take a note and follow up later after they've exhausted their stream of discussion and they've kind of gotten all the memories out that they could think of at that time. If you're focusing on a specific yatra or community, then you could ask to tell me about your role and service in this community or in this temple over the past few years or over the past decades, whatever time period you're covering. And what are the most important events or turning points in the history of the community that you remember? You can also ask, what was it like to live in this community? What was most difficult for you? What was the best for you? Can you give some examples? And how has the broader society reacted to the Hare Krishna community in your area? And how have the relations changed or transformed over time? And then what aspects of the Hare Krishna practice and philosophy have been the most meaningful in your life? This is a question that can be relevant for younger devotees, older devotees, anyone. It's nice to get reflections. I was asking one devotee a little bit of an aside, but it's important principle to keep in mind while interviewing. You never really know what you're going to get from who. Sometimes we think we'll get the best interview from the biggest profile devotees, from the temple presidents or the GBCs, etc. But sometimes you find really wonderful gems from anyone and everyone. It's really amazing. I had a conversation with one devotee who was one of the main interviewers for the recently published biography on Ayendra Prabhu about his life. And this devotee shared with me that he was surprised that some of the people he thought would have the best nectar, actually he was a little bit disappointed. He thought, you lived with Ayendra for 10 plus years, and that's all you can remember? And then other devotees who only spent maybe a year on the Vrindavan Harinam, the 24-hour kirtan, they had really, really special things to share. He was surprised. So it's nice to keep that in mind, that we don't know necessarily who's going to share what, and if you just leave it open-ended and follow your super soul and ask devotees to share what's on their heart, then you can get really nice reflections and memories. Just a couple other questions, just as sample questions you can use to get started. Looking back, what do you think has been the most important contribution of this community to its members and to the wider society? And what do you hope future generations will learn from your experiences in this community? Is there any advice or message you'd like to pass on? So a culture that encourages and supports accurate and self-critical writing of our movement's history can help, first, to foster a sense of mission continuity for Vaishnav communities over multiple generations. So why is this valuable? If we just think of Krishna consciousness as a set of tenets, philosophical tenets or beliefs, we're not going very deep. The Srimad Bhagavatam teaches that there are two types of Bhagavatas, the book Bhagavata and the person Bhagavata. So at least half of our Krishna conscious life has to be learned through hearing about devotees' lives and personally studying and witnessing, practicing devotees who have advanced in their Krishna consciousness. And a big part of this is engaging with devotee histories. Obviously, when we think of devotional histories, we first think of the histories of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates in the Chaitanya Bhagavata, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. There's also so many histories of devotees' lives recorded in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then more contemporary histories like Srila Prabhupada, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and so on. But if we think that after Srila Prabhupada, there were no more devotees from whose lives we can benefit, that the Krishna consciousness movement stopped, will be very deprived. How will we have the courage to think that we can become pure devotees if we think that even our gurus couldn't become pure devotees? Or if we think that nobody after Srila Prabhupada could become pure devotees, then what hope do I have if even these other persons who are so much greater than myself couldn't do it? So what I've found is by studying the histories, the lives of devotees who are contemporary Vaishnavas, like Yamuna Devi, and Ayendra Prabhu, and Gaur Govinda Maharaj, and Hladini Devi, Srila Prabhupada's disciple from New Vrindavan. So many examples are there. That if we study their lives, then we can get so much inspiration. And there's actually so much more out there that has not yet been written and recorded. And what this does is this creates a sense of mission continuity, that we understand, what does it mean to be Krishna conscious? What does Krishna consciousness look like? It's not just a set of philosophical tenets, but it's a living personality, someone you can have a heart-to-heart relationship with, and you can try to imbibe their qualities and emulate their qualities and their activities in your own life. So this next point is also very important that Marge mentioned. What do we have in terms of the historical record after 1977? There are many biographies of Srila Prabhupada, memoirs of Srila Prabhupada, but after 1977, there's not so many. And if you ask devotees about this historical period, a lot of them either don't want to talk about it, or they don't know anything about it, or they just think, yeah, it was really bad. So when you think that the history of our movement for the last 50 years was maybe embarrassing or sad or dark, you don't feel a lot of inspiration to give your life to the ISKCON movement if you think of it in such a negative light. So one big aim of my research over the past year has been to especially recover the positive, glorious achievements that have taken place, that have brought us to where we are today. Because the greatest glory of ISKCON is that it has survived. That's remarkable. It's really a miracle. I think that's why Professor Hopkins was so impressed, was because he saw how quickly ISKCON had spread and how deep its roots were going. So in terms of inspiring future generations of devotees, it's our responsibility to present the history of the Krishna consciousness movement in a way that does justice to the glory of the movement, to what it's achieved, by spreading all over the world. It's much bigger than it was when Srila Prabhupada departed. There's many, 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 many more devotees. The number of literatures that have been distributed, the number of literatures that have been published. There's so many metrics by which we can measure the objective success of the movement over the years. So that's one of my desires, is to preserve the glory that's been achieved. And the last point is to positively direct our future, enabling Srila Prabhupada's prediction to come true, namely that history will give evidence that this movement saved the human society from being fallen into barbarianism. By reflecting on the history, we can understand what was working well. In what areas did we succeed? And in what areas did we fail? And then when necessary, we can correct our course to do more of the things that worked and stop doing the things that didn't work. So history is very important. There's a saying, before I hand it back to Marge, that history is written by the victor. Maybe you've heard this saying. So Lord Chaitanya, what does he say about our Sankirtan movement? Param Vijayate Sri Krishna Sankirtanam. So the Hare Krishna movement is destined for victory, and it's our responsibility to frame our story in a way that actually brings out the glory of bhakti and the glory of Krishna's devotees, rather than only focusing on the faults. We should acknowledge what went wrong. We shouldn't try to hide it, but we also should be honest about how amazing this movement is. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you, Lokaram. I just have one more slide. And again, I'm quoting Tom Hopkins. Whoops. Okay. Much valuable data has no doubt been lost over the years. But devotees should now at least begin to pay more careful attention to preserving the record of the past. He wrote this in 1998, the entire article. You can find online. It's one of the ISKCON Communications Journal issues. It is a glorious past, and it needs to be studied with all the evidence possible. So again, back to this idea of evidence. With all the evidence possible, warts and all. You know this expression. Warts and all, if ISKCON is to remain worthy of Prabhupada's faith in its future. How many of you are car drivers? When I first joined in Germany, none of the devotees had a driver's license except me. My big qualification was that I had a driver's license. But would you feel comfortable driving without a rear view mirror?
Actually, I tried just doing that just recently. I got sideswiped.
Yeah. Yeah, a rear view mirror here and one on that side and one on that side, right? So I think that talking about history, especially, I really think what is immediately applicable for us is doing oral history, as Lokaram Prabhu was explaining. I think this history, it's about having a rear view mirror. We want to move forward. We want to drive forward. We want to advance. This whole ILS is something, I never remember the exact statement, but something about the future, right? We're aiming toward the future. We want to move forward, but what we're trying to say is let's have a good, clean rear view mirror, so that we can see clearly, so that we can understand where we are and where we are going. Cheto darpana marjanam, this cleansing of the mirror of the heart, has something to do also with keeping the rear view mirror clean. So I will end with that. I think we have 3 or 4 minutes if there's a comment. Let's see now. Let's go with Brajbihari first.
2 quick things. Whatever happened to Arya's oral history she did about 20 to 25 years ago? She interviewed hundreds of people. Is that available still?
Maybe you know about that.
Hare Krishna, yes. So Arya Devi was doing interviews, and she has them in an archive. She doesn't have funding at the moment to continue to develop the archive and take it into the next stages, which it's a little bit ambiguous. She didn't want to share a lot with me, but it's preserved, and she does have plans in the future to go through the interviews, see what can be made, what's appropriate to make public, and make it more publicly accessible. But it's kind of a long project, and if you have a relationship with her or Brahmatirtha Prabhu and are able, who's kind of like an advisor to her, and are able to encourage her somewhat to move things forward or invite help to do that, that would be wonderful, because it's a really valuable resource. But right now she's got it, and that's where it is.
Yes, my other quick thing, really quick, was that I remember this very prominent person in Vrindavan told me not too long ago, not to go rah-rah about ISKCON, but he said that he's very elderly, and he said so many organizations have come and gone, and usually after the founder leaves, it just goes downhill, at least their center in Vrindavan. And he's seen that, ISKCON is going in a different direction. He was kind of impressed with how Prabhupada was able to do that.
Jai. Yes, Conte Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. I observe a certain tendency in certain ISKCON publications, or even the Hare Krishna movie, or even the Back to God magazine, and local communications, to really shy away, to be very reluctant to speak of any problems that we faced. And would you like to speak a few words why that it's important to also explore those bit darker chapters of our history.
Well, that's very much substantial in what I'm trying to say. I think that's what I'm trying to say is distinguishing history from propaganda. There's a place for propaganda. Prabhupada used the word a lot in a positive sense. And there's a place for history. And history is where you kind of sit down and you say, well, that's all very well, but what else is going on? And you look more deeply, and you look at the evidence. You listen to the subalterns. We heard history is spoken or is written by the victor. I think part of what we want to do is, yes, there's a place for history, for sort of top-down history, and there's also a place for bottom-up history. And I think especially that's where interviewing, dare I use the word rank and file devotees, is so important. And keeping, one of my questions in the beginning was, who has access to the material that we collect? How do we make it available or not available? Scholars will ask that. You have some history you're keeping under, lock and key. What's this about? What is there we want to see? So I think the more transparent we are, I think the better off we are in the long run.
Thank you.
Kavi Chandra Maharaj.
I asked Giriraj Maharaj if he was going to write about what happened after the Juhu temple opened, which was right after Prabhupada left. I was there. I witnessed madness. I sometimes tell part of it to different senior people. I wonder if it, feel like this should not be published, but maybe it should. It was really crazy. You know that whole period right after Prabhupada left, chaos. But
I don't know specifically in Juhu.
I know Juhu.
You know. Some kinds of history, just like government archives, they'll have things on confidential file only to be opened after everyone who is involved is dead, right? But but it's opened up at least after everyone's dead, so that can be an option. I think we're at the end of our time now, so I want to say thank you all very much. And again, we have this handout. Anyone who's interested how to conduct an effective interview or conduct effective interviews. And also there's an encouragement to contact Lokaram Prabhu with the idea to eventually have a kind of circle of devotees who are doing this interviewing. So this is available. He's distributing it there. Thank you all very, very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.